civilians. In addition, there seem to be higher rates of suicide in times of peace than in times of war and revolution, and in times of economic instability and recession rather than in times of prosperity. Durkheim concluded that the suicide rates of a society reflected the extent to which people were or were not integrated into the group life of the society. Meanwhile, Durkheim, like many other social scientists, developed a theory to explain how individual behavior can be understood within a social context. He pointed out the influence of groups and societal forces on what had always been viewed as a highly personal act. Clearly, Durkheim offered a more scientific explanation for the causes of suicide than that of inherited tendencies or sunspots. His theory has predictive power, since it suggests that suicide rates will rise or fall in conjunction with certain social and economic changes. Of course, a theory, even the best of theories, is not a final statement about human behavior. Durkheim's theory of suicide is no exception. Sociologists continue to examine factors that contribute to differences in suicide rates around the world and to a particular society's rate of suicide. In Las Vegas, for example, sociologists have observed that the chances of dying by suicide are strikingly high, twice as high as in the United States as a whole. Noting Durkheim's emphasis on the relationship between suicide and social isolation, researchers have suggested that Las Vegas' rapid growth and constant influx of tourists have undermined the community's sense of permanence, even among long-time residents. Although gambling, or more accurately, losing while gambling, may seem a likely precipitating factor in suicides there, careful study of the data has allowed researchers to dismiss that explanation. What happens in Vegas may stay in Vegas, but the sense of community cohesiveness that the rest of the country enjoys may be lacking. Ray ETA on 2008-2011. Low 1 to 3 The development of sociology. People have always been curious about sociological matters, how we get along with ERS, what we do for a living, whom we select as our leaders. Philosophers and religious authorities of ancient and medieval societies made countless observations about human behavior. They did not test or verify those observations scientifically. Nevertheless, their observations often became the foundation for moral codes. Several of these early social philosophers correctly predicted that a systematic study of human behavior would emerge one day. Beginning in the 19th century, European theorists made pioneering contributions to the development of the science of human behavior. Early thinkers. Auguste Comte, the 19th century was an unsettling time in France. The French monarchy had been deposed in the Revolution of 1789, and Napoleon had suffered defeat in his effort to conquer Europe. Amid this chaos, philosophers considered how society might be improved. Auguste Comte, 1798-1857, credited with being the most influential of the philosophers of the early 1800s, believed that theoretical science of society and a systematic investigation of behavior were needed to improve society. He coined the term sociology to apply to the science of human behavior. Writing in the 1800s, Comte feared that the excesses of the French Revolution had permanently impaired France's stability. Yet he hoped that the systematic study of social behavior would eventually lead to more rational human interactions. Harriet Martineau scholars learned of Comte's works largely through translations by the English sociologist Harriet Martineau, 1802-1876. But Martineau was a pathbreaker in her own right. She offered insightful observations of the customs and social practices of both her native Britain and the United States. Martineau's book Society in America, 1837, 1962, examined religion, politics, child rearing, and immigration in it. Young Nation. It gave special attention to social class distinctions and to such factors as gender and race. Martineau, 1838, 1989, also wrote the first book on sociological methods. Martineau's writings emphasized the impact that the economy, law, trade, health, and population could have on social problems. She spoke out in favor of the rights of women, the emancipation of slaves, and religious tolerance. Later in life, deafness did not keep her from being an activist. In Martineau's 1837, 1962 view, intellectuals and scholars should not simply offer observations of social conditions, they should act on their convictions in a manner that will benefit society. That is why Martineau conducted research on the nature of female employment and pointed to the need for further investigation of the issue. Deacon 2003, Hill and Boecker Driscoll 2001. Herbert Spencer, another important early contributor to the discipline of sociology, was Herbert Spencer, 1820-1903. A relatively prosperous Victorian Englishman, Spencer, unlike Martineau, did not feel compelled to correct or improve society. Instead, he merely hoped to understand it better. Drawing on Charles Darwin's study on the origin of species, Spencer applied the concept of evolution of the species to societies in order to explain how they changed, or evolved, over time. Similarly, he adapted Darwin's evolutionary view of the survival of the fittest by arguing that it is natural that some people are rich while others are poor. Harriet Martineau, an early pioneer of sociology who studied social behavior both in her native England and in the United States. Martineau proposed some of the methods still used by sociologists, including systematic observation. Spencer's approach to societal change was extremely popular in his lifetime. Unlike Comte, Spencer suggested that since societies are bound to change eventually, one need not be highly critical of present social arrangements or work actively for social change. This viewpoint appealed to many influential people in England and the United States who had a vested interest in the status quo and were suspicious of social thinkers who endorsed change. Meanwhile, Durkheim made many pioneering contributions to sociology, including his important theoretical work on suicide. The son of a rabbi, Durkheim, 1858-1917, was educated in both France and Germany. He established an impressive academic reputation and was appointed one of the first professors of sociology in France. Above all, Durkheim will be remembered for his insistence that behavior must be understood within a larger social context, not just in individualistic terms. To give one example of this emphasis, Durkheim, 1912-2001, developed a fundamental thesis to help explain all forms of society. Through intensive study of the Arotha, an Australian tribe, he focused on the functions that religion performed and underscored the role of group life in defining what we consider to be religion. Durkheim concluded that like other forms of group behavior, religion reinforces a group solidarity. Another of Durkheim's main interests was the consequences of work in modern societies. In his view, the growing division of labor in industrial societies, as workers became much more specialized in their tasks, led to what he called anarchy. Anarchy refers to the loss of direction felt in a society when social control of individual behavior has become ineffective. Often, the state of anarchy occurs during a time of profound social change, when people have lost their sense of purpose or direction. In a period of anarchy, people are so confused and unable to cope with the new social environment that they may resort to suicide. Like many other sociologists, Durkheim did not limit his interest to one aspect of social behavior. Later in this book we will consider his thinking on crime and punishment, religion, and the workplace. Few sociologists have had such a dramatic impact on so many different areas within the discipline. 10. Chapter 1. Understanding Sociology. Max Weber. Another important early theorist was Max Weber, Pronounced paper. Born in Germany, Weber, 1864 to 1920, studied legal and economic history, but gradually developed an interest in sociology. Eventually, he became a professor at various German universities. Weber taught his students that they should employ Verstehen, pronounced Verstehen, the German word for understanding or insight, in their intellectual work. He pointed out that we cannot analyze our social behavior by the same type of objective criteria we use to measure weight or temperature. To fully comprehend behavior, we must learn the subjective meanings people attach to their actions, how they themselves view and explain their behavior. For example, suppose that a sociologist was studying the social ranking of individuals in a fraternity. Weber would expect a researcher to employ Verstehen to determine the significance of the fraternity's social hierarchy for its members. The researcher might examine the effects of athleticism or grades or social skills or seniority on standing within the fraternity. He or she would seek to learn how the fraternity members relate to other members of higher or lower status. While investigating these questions, the researcher would take into account people's emotions, thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes. Kozer 1977. We also owe credit to Weber for a key conceptual tool, the ideal type. An ideal type is a construct or model for evaluating specific cases. In his works, Weber identified various characteristics of bureaucracy as an ideal type. In presenting this model of bureaucracy, Weber was not describing any particular organization, nor was he using the term ideal in a way that suggested positive evaluation. Instead, his purpose was to provide a useful standard for measuring how bureaucratic an actual organization is. Kirk and Mills 1958. Later in this book, we will use the concept of ideal type to study the family, religion, authority, and economic systems, as well as to analyze bureaucracy. Although their professional careers coincided, meanwhile Durkheim and Max Weber never met and probably were unaware of each other's existence, let alone ideas. Such was not true of the work of Karl Marx. Durkheim's thinking about the impact of the division of labor in industrial societies was related to Marx's writings, while Weber's concern for value-free, objective sociology was a direct response to Marx's deeply held convictions. Thus, it is not surprising that Karl Marx is viewed as a major figure in the development of sociology, as well as several other social sciences. Figure 1-1. Karl Marx. Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883, shared with Durkheim and Weber a dual interest in abstract philosophical issues and the concrete reality of everyday life. Unlike them, however, Marx was so critical of existing institutions that a conventional academic career was impossible. He spent most of his life in exile from his native Germany. Marx's personal life was a difficult struggle. When the paper he had written was suppressed, he fled to France. In Paris, he met Friedrich Engels, 1820 to 1895, with whom he formed a lifelong friendship. The two lived at a time when European and North American economic life was increasingly dominated by the factory rather than the farm. While in London in 1847, Marx and Engels attended secret meetings of an illegal coalition of labor unions known as the Communist League. The following year, he prepared a platform called the Communist Manifesto, in which they argued that the masses of people with no resources other than their labor, whom they referred to as the proletariat, should unite to fight for the overthrow of capitalist societies. After completing the Communist Manifesto, Marx returned to Germany, only to be expelled. He then moved to England, where he continued to write books and essays. Marx lived there in extreme poverty. He pawned most of his possessions, and several of his children died of malnutrition and disease. Marx clearly was an outsider in British society, a fact that may well have influenced his view of Western cultures. Academic training. Keywords. Meanwhile, Durkheim 1858 to 1917 philosophy. 1893 the division of labor in society. 1897 suicide, a study in sociology. 1912 elementary forms of religious life. Max Weber 1864 to 1920. Law, economics, history, philosophy. 1904, 1905 the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. 1921 economy and society. Karl Marx 1818 to 1883. Philosophy, law. 1848 the communist manifesto. 1867 Das Kapital. W.E.B. Du Bois 1868 to 1963 sociology. 1899 the Philadelphia Negro. 1903 the Negro Church. 1903 Souls of Black Folk. Source, developed by author. Figure 1-1 contributors to sociology. In Marx's analysis, society was fundamentally divided between two classes that clashed in pursuit of their own interests. When he examined the industrial societies of his time, such as Germany, England, and the United States, he saw the factory as the center of conflict between the exploiters, the owners of the means of production, and the exploited, the workers. Marx viewed these relationships in systematic terms, that is, he believed that a system of economic, social, and political relationships maintained the power and dominance of the owners over the workers. Consequently, Marx and Engels argued that the working class should overthrow the existing class system. Marx's influence on contemporary thinking has been dramatic. His writings inspired those who would later lead communist revolutions in Russia, China, Cuba, Vietnam, and elsewhere. Even apart from the political revolutions that his work fostered, Marx's significance is profound. Marx emphasized the group identifications and associations that influence an individual's place in society. This area of study is a major focus of contemporary sociology. Throughout this textbook, we will consider how membership in a particular gender classification, age group, racial group, or economic class affects a person's attitudes and behavior. In an important sense, we can trace this way of understanding society back to the pioneering work of Karl Marx. W.E.B. Du Bois. Marx's work encouraged sociologists to view society through the eyes of those segments of the population that rarely influence decision-making. In the United States, some early black sociologists, including W.E.B. Du Bois, 1868 to 1963, conducted research that they hoped would assist in the struggle for a racially egalitarian society. Du Bois, pronounced Du Bois, believed that knowledge was essential in combating prejudice and achieving tolerance and justice. Sociologists, he contended, needed to draw on scientific principles to study social problems such as those experienced by blacks in the United States. To separate opinion from fact, he advocated research on the lives of blacks. Through his in-depth studies of urban life, both white and black, in cities such as Philadelphia and Atlanta, Du Bois, 1899-1995, made a major contribution to sociology. Like Durkheim and Weber, Du Bois saw the importance of religion to society. However, he tended to focus on religion at the community level and on the role of the church in the lives of its members. 1903-2003. Du Bois had little patience with theorists such as Module 1 with sociology and how did it develop? 11. Jane Addams, Wright, was an early pioneer both in sociology and in the settlement house movement. She was also an activist for many causes, including the Worldwide Campaign for Peace. The United States have advanced sociological theory and research.
What the fuck? Why is it skipping the part?
Charles Gordon Cooley,
Oh
Charles Gordon
my
Cooley, 1864,
gosh.
1929.
Herbert Spencer, he believed that granting the full political rights is essential for the social and economic what became known as the Atlanta Sociological Laboratory, also promoted groundbreaking research by other scholars. While investigating religion, crime, race, religions, these colleagues trained their students in sociological research. The extensive interviews conducted by students in Atlanta still enriched the understanding of human behavior. Because many of his ideas challenged the status quo, Du Bois did not always find a receptive audience within either the government or world of academic world. As a result, he became increasingly involved with organizations whose members questioned the established social order. 1909, he founded the American Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Insights became lasting. He coined the term double consciousness, division of individuals' identity into two or more social realities. He used this to describe the experience of being black in white America. Today, an African American holds the most powerful office in the nation. Oh, this was when Barack Obama. Oh well.
1929 was typical of the sociologists who came to prominence in the early 1900s. Born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Cooley received his graduate training in economics but later became a sociology professor at the University of Michigan. Like other early sociologists, he had become interested in this new discipline while pursuing a related area of study. Cooley shared the desire of Durkheim, Weber, and Marx to learn more about society. But to do so effectively, he preferred to use the sociological perspective to look first at smaller units, intimate, face-to-face groups such as families, gangs, and friendship networks. He saw these groups as the seedbeds of society, in the sense that they shape people's ideals, beliefs, values, and social nature. Cooley's work increased our understanding of groups of relatively small size. Jane Addams in the early 1900s, many leading sociologists in the United States saw themselves as social reformers dedicated to systematically studying and then improving a corrupt society. They were genuinely concerned about the lives of immigrants in the nation's growing cities, whether those immigrants came from Europe or from the rural American South. Early female sociologists, in particular, often took active roles in poor urban areas as leaders of community centers known as settlement houses. For example, Jane Addams, 1860 to 1935, a member of the American Sociological Society, co-founded the famous Chicago settlement house called Hull House. 12 Chapter 1 Understanding Sociology. Adams and other pioneering female sociologists commonly combined intellectual inquiry, social service work, and political activism, all with the goal of assisting the underprivileged and creating a more egalitarian society. For example, working with the black journalist and educator Ida Wells Barnett, Adams successfully prevented racial segregation in the Chicago public schools. Adams' efforts to establish a juvenile court system and a women's trade union reveal the practical focus of her work. Adams 1910, 1930, Deacon 1991, Lenderman and Neabrati Bradley 1998. Robert Merton, sociologist Robert Merton, 1910 to 2003, made an important contribution to the discipline by successfully combining theory and research. Born to Slavic immigrant parents in Philadelphia, Merton won a scholarship to Temple University. He continued his studies at Harvard, where he acquired his lifelong interest in sociology. Merton's teaching career was based at Columbia University. Merton, 1968, produced a theory that is one of the most frequently cited explanations of deviant behavior. He noted different ways in which people attempt to achieve success in life. In his view, some deviate from the socially approved goal of accumulating material goods or the socially accepted means of achieving that goal. For example, in Merton's classification scheme, innovators are people who accept the goal of pursuing material wealth but use illegal means to do so, including robbery, burglary, and extortion. Although Merton based his explanation of crime on individual behavior that has been influenced by society's approved goals and means, it has wider applications. His theory helps to account for the high crime rates among the nation's poor, who may see no hope of advancing themselves through traditional roads to success. Merton also emphasized that sociology should strive to bring together the macro-level and micro-level approaches to the study of society. Macro-sociology concentrates on large-scale phenomena or entire civilizations. Emile Durkheim's cross-cultural study of suicide is an example of macro-level research. More recently, macro-sociologists have examined international crime rates and the stereotype of Asian Americans as a model minority. In contrast, micro-sociology stresses the study of small groups, often through experimental means. Sociological research on the micro level has included studies of how divorced men and women disengage from significant social roles and of how a teacher's expectations can affect a student's academic performance. Pierre Bourdieu. Increasingly, scholars in the United States have been drawing on the insights of sociologists in other countries. The ideas of the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, 1930 to 2002, have found a broad following in North America and elsewhere. As a young man, Bourdieu did fieldwork in Algeria during its struggle for independence from France. Today, scholars study Bourdieu's research techniques as well as his conclusions. Bourdieu wrote about how capital in its many forms sustains individuals and families from one generation to the next. To Bourdieu, capital included not just material goods, but cultural and social assets. Cultural capital refers to non-economic goods, such as family background and education, which are reflected in knowledge of language and the arts. Not necessarily book knowledge. Cultural capital refers to the kind of education that is valued by the socially elite. Though a knowledge of Chinese cuisine is culture, for example, it is not the prestigious kind of culture that is valued by the elite. In the United States, immigrants, especially those who arrive in large numbers and settle in enclaves, have generally taken 2 or 3 generations to develop the same level of cultural capital enjoyed by more established groups. In comparison, social capital refers to the collective benefit of social networks, which are built on reciprocal trust. Much has been written about the importance of family and friendship networks in providing people with an opportunity to advance. In his emphasis on cultural and social capital, Bourdieu's work extends the insights of early social thinkers such as Marx and Weber, Bourdieu and Passers in 1990, O'Dear 2011. Today, sociology reflects the diverse contributions of earlier theorists. As sociologists approach such topics as divorce, drug addiction, and religious cults, they can draw on the theoretical insights of the discipline's pioneers. A careful reader can hear Durkheim, Weber, Marx, Du Bois, Cooley, Adams, and many others speaking through the Module 1. What is sociology and how did it develop? 13. Pages of current research. Sociology has also broadened beyond the intellectual confines of North America and Europe. Contributions to the discipline now come from sociologists studying and researching human behavior in other parts of the world. In describing the work of these sociologists, it is helpful to examine a number of influential theoretical perspectives, also known as approaches or views. Answer these questions to determine how much you have retained after, after reading the material. Read each question carefully and then select or provide the best answer. 1. While Durkheim's groundbreaking research
reflected the level of group integration. B. Can I write on this or what? My highlighters. Groovy green. B. What the fuck? This is so shit. Beta features. Seriously? That's so cringe. Okay, whatever, man. Urban life. Pretty sure it's this one, but I don't remember. Which sociologist confounded the famous Chicago cell? I don't fucking remember. And blank coined the term something something. So 1 is B, 2 is A, 3 is D. Okay. 4 is theory. 5 is ideal type. Okay. This was boring. Did anyone start on this discussion board? Nothing. Okay. I already watched this. PowerPoint. Sociology is a scientific study of social behavior in human groups. Focuses on how relationships influence people's attitudes and behavior, how societies develop and change. Wright Mills sociological imagination, awareness of the relationships between an individual and the wider society, ability to view society as an outside world, and as an outsider would, looks beyond limited understanding of human behavior. Science is the body of knowledge attained by methods based on systemic observation. So, natural science is a study of physical features of natures and ways they interact and change. Social science is the study of social features of humans and the way they interact and change. Society studies influence that society has on people's attitudes and behavior, seeks to understand ways in which people interact and shape society, examines social relationships scientifically, global recession, marital problems, recession's impact on her education, Hurricane Katrina. Sociologists do not accept something as fact because everyone knows it. Each piece of info must be tested, recorded, analyzed, like the false assumption that women tend to be chattier than men, or a false assumption of higher crime rates in communities on the Texas-Mexican border. Something about the sections of American Sociological Association. What is this sociological theory? It's a set of statements that seeks to explain problems, actions, or behavior. Effective theories have explanatory and predictive power. Like the Durkheim suicide study suggested suicides related to group life. Theories are not final statements about behavior. Philosophers, religious authorities of ancient medieval societies made observations of human behavior. European theorists in the 19th century made pioneering contributions to development of science of human behavior. Early thinkers, Auguste Comte, systemic systematic investigation of behavior, coined term sociology. Harriet Martineau studied soci- social behavior in Britain and US, emphasized impact of economy, law, trade, and health, population on social problems. Herbert Spencer controversially proposed evolution in society. Emile Durkheim, my bad, behavior must be understood within larger social contexts, developed a fundamental thesis to help explain all forms of society. A nominee loss of direction felt in a society when social control of individual behavior becomes ineffective, did not limit interest to one aspect. Max Weber, to comprehend behavior, one must learn subjective meaning people attach to actions. Verstenheim, understanding insight, ideal type, construct for evaluating specific cases. Emile Durkheim never met each other and probably were blah blah whatever. Karl Marx, society divided two classes that clash in pursuit of interest. Worked with Friedrich Engels, the Communist Manifesto, working class should overthrow existing class system, emphasize group identification and associations that influence one's place in society. W. D. Du Bois, among the early black sociologists struggling for racially egalitarian society, knowledge essential in combating prejudice, in-depth studies of urban life, focused on religion at community level, double consciousness, division of individuals' identity into two or more social realities. 12th century developments. Charles Horton Cooley used sociological perspective to examine face-to-face groups. Jane Addams combined intellectual inquiry, social service work, and political activism, co-founded Hull House. Robert Merton combined theory and research, developed dominant theory of deviant behavior, advocated bringing together two approaches, macro-sociology and micro-sociology. Pierre Bourdieu, capital sustains individuals and families from one generation to the next. The cultural capital, non-economic goods, reflected in knowledge of language and arts. Social capital, collective benefit of social networks. Contributors to society. Major theoretical perspectives. Functionalist perspective, conflict perspective, interactionist perspective.
Low 2 to 1 functionalist perspective. Think of society as a living organism in which each part of the organism contributes to its survival. This view is the functionalist perspective, which emphasizes the way in which the parts of a society are structured to maintain its stability. In examining any aspect of society, then, functionalists emphasize the contribution that it makes to overall social stability. Talcott Parsons, 1902 to 1979, a Harvard University sociologist, was a key figure in the development of functionalist theory. Parsons was greatly influenced by the work of Emile Durkheim, Max Weber, and other European sociologists. For more than 4 decades, he dominated sociology in the United States with his advocacy of functionalism. Parsons saw any society as a vast network of connected parts, each of which helps to maintain the SYSTM as a whole. His approach, carried forward by German sociologist Nicholas Luhmann, 1927 to 1998, holds that if an aspect of social life does not contribute to a society's stability or survival, if it does not serve some identifiably useful function or promote value consensus among members of society, it will not be passed on from one generation to the next. Jones and Nobel 2009, Knudsen 2010. Let's examine an example of a functionalist perspective. Many Americans have difficulty understanding the Hindu prohibition against slaughtering cows, specifically, zebu. Cattle browse unhindered through Indian street markets, helping themselves to oranges and mangoes while people bargain for the little food they can afford. What explains this devotion to the cow in the face of human deprivation, devotion that appears to be dysfunctional? The simple explanation is that cow worship is highly functional in Indian society, according to economists, agronomists, and social scientists who have studied the matter. Cows perform two essential tasks, plowing the fields and producing milk. If eating beef were permitted, hungry families might be tempted to slaughter their cows for immediate consumption, leaving themselves without a means of cultivation. Cows also produce dung, which doubles as a fertilizer and fuel for cooking. Finally, cow meat sustains the neediest group in society, the Dalit, or untouchables, who sometimes resort to eating beef in secrecy. If eating beef were socially acceptable, higher status Indians would no doubt give up its prize, placing it beyond the reach of the hungriest. Cows, Zebu, traditionally considered sacred in India, wander freely through the city, respected by all who encounter them. The sanctity of the cow is still functional in India, where plowing, milking, and fertilizing are far more important to subsistence farmers than a diet that includes beef. Manifest and latent functions. A college catalog typically states various functions of the institution. It may inform you, for example, that the university intends to offer each student a broad education in classical and contemporary thought, in the humanities, in the sciences, and in the arts. However, it would be quite a surprise to find a catalog that declared, this university was founded in 1895 to assist people in finding a marriage partner. No college catalog will declare this as the purpose of the university. Yet societal institutions serve many functions, some of them quite subtle. The university, in fact, does facilitate mate selection. Robert Merton, 1968, made an important distinction between manifest and latent functions. Manifest functions of institutions are open, stated, and conscious functions. They involve the intended, recognized consequences of an aspect of society, such as the university's role in certifying academic competence and excellence. In contrast, latent functions are unconscious or unintended functions that may reflect hidden purposes of an institution. One latent function of universities is to hold down unemployment. Another is to serve as a meeting ground for people seeking marital partners. 16 Chapter 1 Understanding. Dysfunctions. Functionalists acknowledge that not all parts of a society contribute to its stability all the time. A dysfunction refers to an element or process of a society that may actually disrupt the social system or reduce its stability. We view many dysfunctional behavior patterns, such as homicide, as undesirable. Yet we should not automatically interpret them in this way. The evaluation of a dysfunction depends on one's own values, or as the saying goes, on where you sit. For example, the official view in prisons in the United States is that inmate gangs should be eradicated because they are dysfunctional to smooth operations. Yet some guards have come to view prison gangs as a functional part of their jobs. The danger posed by gangs creates a threat to security, requiring increased surveillance and more overtime work for guards, as well as requests for special staffing to address gang problems. G. Scott 2001. Low 2-to-1 conflict perspective. Where functionalists see stability and consensus, conflict sociologists see a social world in continual struggle. The conflict perspective assumes that social behavior is best understood in terms of tension between groups over power or the allocation of resources, including housing, money, access to services, and political representation. The tension between competing groups need not be violent. It can take the form of labor negotiations, party politics, competition between religious groups for new members, or disputes over the federal budget. Throughout most of the 1900s, the functionalist perspective had the upper hand in sociology in the United States. However, the conflict approach has become increasingly persuasive since the late 1960s. The widespread social unrest resulting from battles over civil rights, bitter divisions over the war in Vietnam, the rise of the feminist and gay liberation movements, the Watergate political scandal, urban riots, confrontations at abortion clinics, and shrinking economic prospects for the middle class have offered support for the conflict approach of view that are social. World is characterized by continual struggle between competing groups. Currently, the discipline of sociology accepts conflict theory as one valid way to gain insight into a society. The Marxist view. As we saw earlier, Karl Marx viewed struggle between social classes as inevitable, given the exploitation of workers that he perceived under capitalism. Expanding on Marx's work, sociologists and other social scientists have come to see conflict not merely as a class phenomenon but as a part of everyday life in all societies. In studying any culture, organization, or social group, sociologists want to know who benefits, who suffers, and who dominates at the expense of others. They are concerned with the conflicts between women and men, parents and children, cities and suburbs, whites and blacks, to name only a few. Conflict theorists are interested in how societies what might these tattoos suggest to a Marxist theorist. Sociologists who take the Marxist view ask who benefits, who suffers, and who dominates. Module 2 Major Theoretical Perspective 17. Ida Wells Barnett explored what it meant to be female and black in the United States. Her work established her as one of the earliest feminist theorists. Institutions including the family, government, religion, education, and the media may help to maintain the privileges of some groups and keep others in a subservient position. Their emphasis on social change and the redistribution of resources makes conflict theorists more radical and activist than functionalists. Therinder, 1959. The feminist perspective. Sociologists began embracing the feminist perspective only in the 1970s, although it has a long tradition in many other disciplines. The feminist perspective sees inequity in gender as central to all behavior and organization. Because it focuses clearly on one aspect of inequality, it is often allied with the conflict perspective. Proponents of the feminist view tend to focus on the macro level, just as conflict theorists do. Drawing on the work of Marx and Engels, contemporary feminist theorists often view women's subordination as inherent in capitalist societies. Some radical feminist theorists, however, view the oppression of women as inevitable in all male-dominated societies, whether capitalist, socialist, or communist. An early example of this perspective, long before the label came into use by sociologists, can be seen in the life and writings of Ida Wells Barnett, 1862 to 1931. Following her groundbreaking publications in the 1890s on the practice of lynching black Americans, she became an advocate in the women's rights campaign, especially the struggle to win the vote for women. Like feminist theorists who succeeded her, Wells Barnett used her analysis of society as a means of resisting oppression. In her case, she researched what it meant to be black, a woman in the United States, and black women in the United States. Giddings 2008, Wells Barnett 1970. Queer theory. Traditionally, sociologists and other researchers have assumed that men and women are heterosexual. They either ignored other sexual identifications or treated them as abnormal. Yet as French social theorist Michel Foucault,
Michael Foucault.
Even acceptable human sexuality varies dramatically from one culture to another, as well as from one time period to another. Today, in queer theory, sociologists have moved beyond narrow assumptions to study sexuality in all its forms. Historically, the word queer was used in a derogatory manner to stigmatize a person or behavior. Beginning in the early 1970s, however, gay and lesbian activists began to use the word as a term of empowerment. They dismissed the notion of heterosexuality as the only normal form of sexuality.
Queer as folk.
Either heterosexual or homosexual. Instead, they recognized multiple sexual identities, including bisexuality. Queer theory is a study of society from the perspective of a broad spectrum of sexual identities, including heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality. Low 2-to-1 interactionist perspective. Workers interacting on the job, encounters in public places like bus stops and parks, the hot hour in small groups, all these aspects of microsociology catch the attention of interactionists. Whereas functionalist and conflict theorists both analyze large-scale, society-wide patterns of behavior, theorists who take the interactionist perspective generalize about everyday forms of social interaction in order to explain society as a whole. Today, given rising concern over the cost and availability of gas, interactionists have begun to study a form of commuter behavior called slugging. To avoid driving to work, commuters gather at certain pre-appointed places to seek rides from complete strangers. When the driver pulls into the parking area or vacant lot and announces his destination, the first slug in line who is headed for that destination jumps in. Rules of etiquette have emerged to smooth the social interaction between driver and passenger. Neither the driver nor the passenger may eat or smoke. The slug may not adjust the windows or radio or talk on a cell phone. The presence of the slugs, who get a free ride, may allow the driver to use special lanes reserved for high occupancy vehicles. Slug-lines.com 2011.
Huh.
18 check. Interact.
Like a hitchhiker. Functionalist perspective emphasizes the way parts of a society are structured to maintain its stability. By Talcott Parsons, viewed society as a vast network of connected parts. Each helps maintain the system as a whole. Manifest and latent functions. Manifest functions are open, stated conscious functions, intended and recognized consequences of an aspect of society. Latent functions, unconscious or unintended functions, may reflect hidden purposes. Dysfunctions, elements or processes of society that may disrupt a social system or reduce its stability. Homicide! Anyways, conflict perspective assumes social behavior best understood in terms of conflict or tension between competing groups. The Marxist view conflict is a part of everyday life in all societies. Me and my dad, we theories interested in how institutions may help maintain privileges of some groups and keep others subservient. The feminist perspective sees inequality in gender as central to all behavior and organization. Often allied with conflict theory, proponents tend to focus on macro level. Contemporary feminist theories often view women's subordination as inherent in capitalist society. Queer theory, the study of society from the perspective of a broad spectrum of sexual identities, including heteros, homos, and bisexuals. Michael Foucault, what is regarded as normal or even acceptable human sexuality varies dramatically by culture and time period. Okay, am I done with this for now? I'm done for now. Boop.